Okay, so our keynote speaker today is professor of law, constitutional law, to be specific, at Georgetown, and who is director of something called the Coalition for Racial Equity and Democratic Economy, and is president of the Gatebridge Foundation in the DMV, and is a research fellow with the Democracy Collaborative, and who has actually invested a lot of time and energy in building relationships with us here at GMU in the last year in particular, as we've been sort of building the connections here. Particularly important because of the work that he's doing. Anthony Cook goes way back, even further back than some others of us in this room, in terms of doing critical work that led the way for new fields of study. Was involved in the early work around critical race theory and legal studies in the 1980s, leading into the early 1990s, and is an example of the kind of law professor that I aspired to be when I decided to get my PhD in sociology. That was my original intent, was to end up at a law school, and then sociology grabbed me because I have a background in law. So I just have to say I've been overjoyed to have built this partnership and this friendship with you, Anthony, over this past year and a half. It's like it's been that long, and we keep on crossing paths because we're trying to cross paths more and more. Right. So thank you so much for taking time to come out here and joining us and sharing the work around Rosie's and the broader theory of change that involves. Welcome, Professor Anthony Cook of Georgetown Law, please.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ben, for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it. It's been a delight working with you across this year or so now, and I look forward to more depthful engagement as the months and years go on, right? Yeah. This is critical work you're doing, and you've made such progress, over the period of time that you've stood this up. And so I know it's a team effort with Eleanor and so many people that whose names I can't call, but I know it's all about, making the dream work because the team works, right? So thank you for your diligence and the work that you're putting in. So as Ben said, I'm a law professor at Georgetown Law Center. I stood up an initiative at the law school called CREED, the Coalition for Racial Equity and Democratic Economy. It was really inspired by a lot of community work and engagement work that I was doing around affordable housing and around community entrepreneurship and social enterprises, and eventually around wealth inequality and community wealth building. And what I saw in the spaces that I was navigating was that all too often, Black groups and communities that I was engaging with, they looked at work through a predominantly racial equity lens, right? And that's understandable given the history of slavery, segregation, mass incarceration, and the number that American society and history has done on Black people. And so I've been part of NCOBRA and the struggle for racial reparations and other groups that are fighting around that, right? But too often, the work would dangerously cascade into the politics of representation, because the obsession almost became, the marker of racial equity is our access to and our representation in existing institutions, organizations, and structures, right? And sometimes there was a lack of critical questioning and engagement with those structures to interrogate the ways in which they construct oppression, exploitation, and marginalization within the Black community, but within other communities as well, right? On the other hand, when I was part of democratic economy movements, sometimes there was a lack of critical engagement with the history of white supremacy and race, right? And that was disturbing, because the assumption, of course, was that if we could reconstruct the existing economy into something that was fairer, more equitable, where the means of production and modalities of production were altered and changed to center workers, for instance, or communities, that the race thing, white supremacy, with this long pervasive history, will work itself out, right? Black people who've operated in predominantly white institutions and struggling in this context, they know that very seldom do things automatically work themselves out, right? That white supremacy, like patriarchy, runs deep, is pervasive, and it has to be very intentionally engaged, interrogated, deconstructed, and reconstructed in an understanding of equity and fairness that challenges not only larger class systems, but also race systems that operate within them, outside them, and sometimes gives birth to the class systems themselves, right? And so Coalition for Racial Equity and Democratic Economy is an attempt to have a conversation between these traditions, and to put them in location with each other, and to figure out how you can move forward with a project that is simultaneously deconstructing class privilege and deconstructing race privilege, and re-envisioning a new world in which the equity, both with regard to workers' issues and the economy, coincides with the deconstruction and reconstruction of vision around racial equity and fairness, right? So that's what CREED is attempting to do. Our focus in CREED is around the racial wealth gap in particular, right? So I want to do an overview of the mission of CREED, which is what I've done pretty much, but I want to talk about closing the racial wealth gap. Then we'll move to our inaugural project with CREED, which is the challenge to food apartheid. Rosie's Grocery towards a post-capitalist vision of democratic economy, and then I'll conclude with some questions and discussion. Okay. Well, first, within the larger context, although CREED is dealing very specifically at a kind of community-based engagement approach to bridging the racial wealth gap, we understand that wealth disparities and inequalities, of course, are a global issue, right? Oxfam reported that billionaires' fortunes are growing at an unimaginable pace. In 2024, billionaire wealth surged at triple the rate of 2023, and new Oxfam data shows we can expect at least 5 trillionaires within a decade. Meanwhile, the number of people experiencing poverty remains essentially unchanged. By the time I'm done with this talk, we would have generated at least another billionaire in the world, right? The disparities of wealth have been grave at various points in time in American history, for sure, right? The Gilded Age, the era of slavery before it, wealth inequality has been part and parcel of the American story, the American fabric, right? But I think the pace at which this wealth inequality is taking place now is just unprecedented, right? The world's top 1% own more than 95% of all humanity, right? So this is what, in place-based economics and community-based economics, the kind of work that I do, this is a larger context in which you're struggling, which means one very important thing to me. It means that our work, as local as it might be, must develop an understanding that is geopolitical, that is beyond the particular community that we're dealing with. And when we are connecting the works of various communities, we need themes that connective tissue, right? That is simultaneously teaching and raising the consciousness of folk that we are engaging and ourselves about the ways in which our work fits into a larger context that has to be understood and has to be challenged. This raises all kinds of questions, as CREED will be getting into, and as I'm sure Next Systems will be getting into, with regard to the relationship between our work and public policy, and what kinds of laws and regulations and policies need to be in place in order to foster a next system, a vision of something different than what we are presently doing. And you can see how this wealth disparity is not only global, of course, but it impacts the United States. On that right chart, you see that the fourth quarter of 2023, top 1% had 23% share of all the wealth in America. And that grew from 1990 from 17% to that 23%, to the top 1%. And the top 20%, when you exclude that 1%, it grew from 44% of all wealth to 47% of all wealth. Meanwhile, at the bottom there, that bottom 20%, 3%, control and allocation of wealth. And that's gone down in the years since. It's around 2.85 now, I understand, right? So the disparities of wealth within the American society are growing. They're intensifying. There's no turning back. And of course, the rise of fascism that we see in the works of Agent Orange and the Afrikaner, right? That is basically what is at stake here. How do I capture the state and the government for purposes of fleecing it, of turning it to my advantage, manipulating stock markets, and being able to basically extract from us taxpayers monies to build and build their wealth. Okay, bringing it on down with regard to the black-white dynamic, you'll see here that in 2019, the typical white family had $184,000 in wealth, and the typical black family had $23,000, right? And overall, 82% of all black families had less wealth than the typical white family in 2019, and that is little change since 1989, right? So the disparity of wealth, nationwide with regard to black communities versus white communities is pervasive. No matter where you go, this is a problem. Are there black people who are rich, fabulously rich? Of course there are, right? But this is, a stat that looks at what the median wealth is. So 1/2 of the black community is, below the median wealth of white families and have been consistently since 1989. And the present median wealth is, a multiple of, what is that? 8, okay? An 8x multiple. And look, the multiple gets even worse when you look at DC. In a report that was done by, the Urban Institute along with Duke University, the color of wealth in the nation's capital, white households in DC have a net worth 81 times that of black neighborhoods, right? 81 in the nation's capital. In 2013 and 2014, the typical white household in DC had a net worth of $284,000. Black American households, in contrast, had a net worth of $3,500, right? That's just absolutely shocking, And so with my work, place-based community wealth building and development, takes place in this context. Basically in a city that used to be called Chocolate City because it was majority black, right? But now is, a minority of black residents. It has moved from Chocolate City to Cappuccino City on its way to Cafe Latte City. And the gentrification that has taken place, over the past, 15, 20 years, this gentrification has resulted in black people being pushed out of DC. We have the largest rate of displacement of any major city in the country. And a number of black people moved out and away altogether, but many of them moved across the Anacostia River into Ward 7 and 8 that are predominantly black, 90% black, by the way, right? Or into Prince George's County, which is often referred to as Ward 9. And so, the concentration of black people in Ward 7 and 8, where I do predominantly my work, right, is one that is very much challenged by what this disparity in wealth, this displacement has wrought over the last 20 years or so. So let me tell you about Cree's inaugural project, The Challenge of Food Apartheid. But I'll set that up by first of all stating that, the drivers of this wealth inequality, have to be kind of understood. And I won't go into all of them today, but I do want to give you a few of them that we are working on, evaluating and studying in Creed so as to better inform our work in Southeast DC. First of all, one driver is, of course, historical context and racial discrimination. A study by the Urban Institute, again, reported that neighborhoods historically subjected to redlining, which systematically denied loans based on racial demographics, still exhibit, right, significant disparities in home ownership and property values today. For example, neighborhoods that were redlined in the 1930s, right, still have lower property values and are predominantly black. People always want to say that, okay, slavery, segregation, these were things of the past. I'm not really responsible for that. How am I benefiting from that, right? But of course, the problems and the pervasive inequality and oppression of slavery and segregation, they're still with us. And redlining is a perfect example of that, as understood and explored in this study. There were laws in place in DC where black people simply could not live. there was a rule, of, no affordable housing or no black people west of Rock Creek Park. And so those areas are predominantly white today, largely because that's the way that they were designed to be. Georgetown very intentionally did not integrate, public transportation and metro into Georgetown because they did not want black people to visit and to maybe stay longer than they wanted them to in that part of town, right? It was just par for the course. When in the New Deal, when Roosevelt, started to develop the suburbs and put money forward to do that, the contractual arrangement with regard to developers developing the suburbs around DC was that you can't build for and rent to black people, right? And so that was the understanding, and that understanding was cemented in the regulations associated with providing money and finance to build the suburbs outside of DC and in many cities around the nation, right? So there has been ongoing redlining in many ways, de facto redlining that has continued even after the de jure redlining, right? But certainly this history of de jure redlining is present today because it has created an undervaluation of places where people live. You can pick up a house in Anacostia, DC, in Southeast DC, and take it to Ward 3 and automatically add $400,000 of value to the house. Same exact house, right? That is true all across the nation. Wealth or home ownership is a big driver of course, wealth creation. And so if you've been discriminated against and you haven't been able to buy and own houses, then that, of course, will determine how much wealth you'll be able to accumulate. Educational inequities. We had a report that was done by the superintendent of education, and it showed that while 43% of white students in DC attend schools that are rated outstanding, only 16% of black students attend similarly rated schools, right? And this gap in access to quality of education contributes to the disparities that we are talking about, right? Student loan debt. How many students in here are struggling with student loan debt? You know what that is all about, right? Black students struggle with it, even more. They carry an average of $25,000 in student loans compared to their white, $25,000 more in student loans compared to their white counterparts. And we're learning from studies that, these student loans, they stay with people all their freaking lives, right? There are people in their 40s, in their 50s, still have not paid back their student loans. So it's a huge problem. The home ownership rate that I referenced earlier, understand that as of 2020, the home ownership rates for white households in Washington, D.C. was about 75%, while the rate for black home ownership was at 45%, right? Intergenerational wealth. If you're white in America, you're twice as likely to inherit 3 times as much money, right? There are only a relatively small percentage of black families, about 10%, that are passing on any inheritance to their children. Now imagine what's going to happen in this day and time with the silver tsunami, right? And with the intergenerational transfer of wealth that's taking place between, in communities, in families, right? Those figures simply mean that the rich and the wealthy will get richer and wealthier, right? And that black people and people of color will fall farther and farther behind, right? So these are drivers, you see, with regard to this wealth gap that we have to kind of keep in mind as creating a context for the work that we do in CREED and in community wealth building. And you'll see how understanding this and being present to it informs, the work that is being done. Okay, so the scale of food apartheid. We decided to weigh in after a year of studying. Are we going to weigh into housing to deal with this racial wealth gap? Are we going to weigh into some educational project to do this? Are we going to do something with regard to the prison industrial complex and steal the problems of an carcerative state? And we decided instead that we were going to go the food route. And that was a result of research that revealed, one, since the criteria for the projects that we wanted to incubate was that we had to find a project we believe was investable. And that means that we could clearly ascertain that there was capital, philanthropic capital and otherwise social capital, that was flowing into this particular area of work. So we wanted to find something where we felt that we had a better than even chance, if we really designed something unique, innovative, and special, that we could find capital to finance the startup costs for it and to move on, right? So we ascertained from the research that there was a lot of money and a lot of discourse and discussion going on about food insecurity, about food apartheid, right? And about black people, brown people, poor people not having access to fresh food, with all the attendant health ailments and disparity that not having that access created, right? And so we decided, based on that research, that we were going to move into the food area. The number of people living in what's called LILAs, we used to call them food deserts. LILAs are low income, low access to fresh food areas. In an urban area, if you live in a community that you're more than a mile away from a grocery store that is a full service grocery store, and your community has a poverty rate that is around 20% or so, then you live in a USDA officially designated LILA, low income, low access to fresh food area, right? So the number of people living in such areas in the USA, you see 56.7 million folk, right? That's a lot of people. 6.3 million in the Mid-Atlantic area, 862,000 in the DMV, and about 114,000 in DC, all right? So we knew from this, given the discourse, the money that was flowing, and figures like these, that there was a real need here, right? No question about it. The question became, could we construct a solution to meet that need that would meet our criteria for an investable business that is capable of scaling if done properly. So food apartheid in the nation's capital, you can see this map of DC. Look at all the white dots. Those are grocery stores in DC, right? See all the black dots east of the river, the communities I've been talking about, Ward 7 and 8. Those are the missing grocery stores. Per capita, 160,000 people in Ward 7 and 8. If we had a grocery store comparable to what you see in the white dots west of the river, we would have 15 more stores in that community, right? Presently, we have 4. One's about to close. There will be 3. And we hope to be moving into that location with our project. But still, even with 4 grocery stores, you got 14 missing stores. So 82% of DC's LILAs are in Ward 7 and 8. This is not by accident. We call it food apartheid because this is part of redlining. This is a food gerrymandering that has taken place that results in this, right? 90% of the people who live in Ward 7 and 8 are black, not accidentally, but very, very intentionally with regard to where they couldn't stay, where they were forced to stay, and where they had to stay given the displacement of gentrification, right? 22% of DC's population lives in Wards 7 and 8, but those wards only have 3 grocery stores, 5% of the total city grocery stores. And there are 22 convenience stores in a 2-mile radius in DC's LILA zones, and those contribute to all kinds of racial health disparities, right? This is why the diabetes rates in these communities are much higher. That's why cardiovascular illnesses and disease, cancer, runs high. This is why all kinds of disparities with regard to health and quality of life exist here. Now, I told you about the house that if you picked up and moved to west of the river, how much more it would be worth. If you were able to live as a black person west of the river in one of those communities, you would add 15 years to your life expectancy. That's shocking, right? 15 years, right? That's seeing, children have children. That's so much of life that is missed out on. And not to mention that even before you succumb, even before you die, 15 years earlier than you would if you lived simply right across the river, right? Your quality of health, right, may be challenging as well. They may not be the enjoyable years, So there are all kinds of problems associated with this. Okay, but here's what we found out. This is a market, right, that has a lot of money. It's not as though people are not buying food. They've got to live, right, somewhere. They got to eat somewhere. And so it's a $445 million market just in Ward 7 and 8 a year. $265 million in being spent on foods consumed at home, and the other $178 million consumed on meals out of home, right? So in doing our business plan and strategy analysis, we asked ourselves, for the 2 stores in our business plan that we're trying to open east of the river, can we see ourselves getting, 5% of that market? 5% of a $445 million market is, let's call it $20 million. Each store under our, pro forma, our business plan, needs to do $10 million, not to be sustainable. 10 million level is at the level of, okay, you can go to bed and sleep through the night because this store has a great chance of being successful, right? So the 10 million mark is like a magic mark for the size grocery stores that we envision, right? And that would constitute basically a 5% capture of this market. And we just became convinced that we could capture 5% of this market. And so 2 stores for us in our plan would be quite reasonable. All right, so you've seen this before, Preston model, community wealth building model out of the Democracy Collaborative. I've tweaked it a bit with regard to the way that we are approaching the problem and how we're dealing with it. So let me explain to you what's going on here. We stood up a nonprofit called Gatebridge Community. You see it in the middle there. Gatebridge Community acts as the community wealth building ecosystem steward of the project, right? For reasons that I'll tell you later. But it has several purposes. The first purpose is that we envision Gatebridge as an incubator, an ideator, incubator, and accelerator of community wealth building initiatives. In other words, we have the internal capacity, and will develop this capacity, to be able to work with communities to move ideas from the idea stage into the incubation stage and into the acceleration stage, which means you're ready to launch. You raise money, aggregate capital, and launch the business. Rosie's is at the aggregation stage now, right? And we brought it through the ideation phase and the incubation phase, right? So we're ready to accelerate it into launch and scale. And so this is important for a nonprofit, I think, because when you look at, we all have iPhones, Androids, whatever, right? The companies that produce these products, they spend 3% to 32%, depending on the sector, in R&D alone, right? I mean, just, hundreds of millions of dollars go into the R&D efforts to create the things that are consumer products. When it comes to the work that we do, we just don't have very many organizations that are intentionally structured and have the expertise in business, finance, and law to help communities, take something from the idea stage to actually accelerating it into launch and scale. And so Gatebridge wants to be one of the few organizations that has that. We see ourselves, of course, as a community nonprofit. And so the board is comprised of all but one board member is a DC resident. And we have residents from Ward 7 and 8 who serve on the board of Gatebridge. But that's not where we ended. Gatebridge is surrounded and bolstered by community advisory councils, right, that are from the areas that we serve, that we pay, and that they become focus group members to provide feedback, to participate and co-create design and the initiatives in question, and we are regularly engaged with them. CREED has a community engagement coordinator that kind of handles the coordination of all this. So we take community engagement and community input very seriously at every stage of what we do, right? So Gatebridge is connected to community. Finally, Gatebridge is responsible for quarterbacking and orchestrating, this kind of, multi-moving piece, creation, right? For instance, on the bottom, you see the social public-private partnership. We're familiar with public-private partnerships, right? And public-private partnerships are extraordinarily problematic. You might call them problematic public-private partnerships, right? Because what has happened, in so many areas and sectors, what has happened is that the private sector has utilized its capital, its money, its promise of jobs and consulting gigs once public officials leave office to establish very too cozy relationships many times with the public sector, with government, right? And even when that does not happen and everything is above board, the public-private partnership tends to patronize and to leave out communities, right? Because they will bring a final result to them to have allow them to check off the box of, okay, we involve community, we consulted community, okay? Now, okay, let's get back to the business of doing this, right? Which leaves and marginalizes them to the side. That is what happens in so many instances. I was part of a community meeting around a real estate development project, and the government was in the meeting, the Department of Education in DC, presenting another iteration of the same idea to the community members. And the community members were irate. This is not another iteration. This is the same bullshit that you gave us the first time and wasted our time having to come here and tell you that we did not want this. It hasn't changed. We still don't want this, right? And it got really, really heated to the point that a chair was flung across the room, and some choice expletives were shared. So it's like many community members, they are sick and tired, really, of this kind of relationship of just talking and not really listening to them and not really involving them in the actual decision-making process. They're just sick and tired of it. They're sick and tired of being sick and tired, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, right? So what we do then is we organize a social public-private partnership. We're envisioning a process in which the social sector, and by this I mean the community social sector that Gatebridge represents, right, is part of and leads really this collaboration. What does it look like for this nonprofit group that is representative of the community to actually lead the developments and the engagements? And where we come into a meeting with business plans, with designs, and we are informing the public sector and the private sector what their roles are, what we want their roles to be, right? And we've done all of the methodical work to be able to leverage that relationship to achieve what we need to achieve. In my case, this social public-private partnership is comprised of foundations in DC, UPO, which is a major civil rights era service-oriented workforce development organization that we forged a great relationship. The Deputy Mayor's Office of Planning Economic Development within the DC government, all right? So, and there are many more, Georgetown's involved in this, I convinced Georgetown to give me $1 million for this project, right? I mean, and people who know me and my engagement with Georgetown and my radicalism on campus, and know Georgetown as well, as stingy as it is, right? Say, how in the hell did you accomplish that, right? But things are possible, I think, when you put together the right teams and you have the right pressure points on institutions. And I had pressure points on them well before the ask, right? And things worked out well. The private sector is, in this case, for us, national co-op grocers that you see down at the bottom there, right? And I look first in the private sector for social enterprises. National Co-op Grocers is itself a cooperative of 240 co-op grocery stores in the nation, right? What they do in this solidarity economy and community wealth building space is phenomenal. And they have 20 years of expertise in standing up and operating co-ops and stuff like that. And so they, in the spirit of one of the values of cooperativism, co-ops helping other co-ops, man, they have just like reached out to me and embraced me fully. I mean, I've traveled and you know, spent time at probably 30 different co-ops around the nation, speaking to store managers. They would open their books to me. I would, you know, read all their finances and able to see how the business worked from the inside out, interview employees and workers. And I would sometimes, you know, I worked late sometimes, and so I would, you know, fire off an email, not expecting a response at 3 o'clock in the morning. But they would email me back at 3:30 in the morning sometimes, right? And I had to stop doing it because I felt guilty, right? But that is the spirit that so many of the people that I find in this space bring into the space. And so if I have my druthers with regard to everything that Creed and Gatebridge incubate and accelerate in the future, my private sector partner will be a solidarity, economy, and community wealth building partner like NCG, if you can find that functional equivalent. If not, and it has to be someone in the private sector, then they have to have a solidarity consciousness. They have to get what we are doing, right? And you know, be willing to integrate themselves into a system in which they are limiting the extraction of wealth and fees and stuff like that from the process. Of course, everybody has to be paid fairly, okay? And you want that, but you don't want predatory behavior, right? And I've done some development in the past, real estate development in the past, and you can run into some very predatory behavior in this field. And so you can see how this works. Many of you probably know. The idea is for us to organize the social public-private partnership so as to bring grants and technical support, the blue-green arrow, out into the support of Gatebridge, the nonprofit, and then in turn, Gatebridge will get that out the door to our initiatives in the form of long-term patient capital and continued technical support. Expertise being brought to the initiative that stays with the initiative throughout the process of moving through the life cycle of startup, early stage, and mature businesses. And then that comes back, blue-green line on the other side, into Gatebridge as dividends and interest that allows us to create the capital fund, rotating revolving capital fund that then can fund other initiatives, okay? And you can see that we try to organize the social public-private partnerships, those to whom this is applicable, to enter into procurement contracts with Rosie's and with our solidarity economy initiatives, right? In this case, Georgetown University, for instance, that's what we're working with now, right? Here are the ways we think you can support Rosie's and our reaching sustainability. Let's see if we can work something out in regard to this. And then, of course, goods and services then come back into the social public-private partnership. This circular economics, this system, this ecosystem, it is what will sustain, moving forward, the long-term well-being, I think, of the initiatives that we incubate and accelerate. They will create, as you see at the top of the chart, jobs, but not only jobs, but jobs that are ownership jobs, that also are not only benefiting the worker owners and the consumer owners, but also benefiting the community at large, right? So this is an alternative to extractive capitalism. Money, this $445 million I told you about, it's gonna come into the system one way or another. It may come into an extractive grocery. When it comes into an extractive grocery, like Safeway, Giant, so forth and so on, even Trader Joe's, as much as I think they got some good stuff going on that we're trying to emulate at Trader Joe's, but even Trader Joe's, right? Some of that money is going to be used to pay the local workers, right? But a lot of that money leaks out to support regional offices, headquarters, right? It leaks out to support the bonuses of C-suite executives and other mid-level executives. It leaks out in the form of the returns that must be generated to satisfy shareholders, right? It's a lot of leakage, a lot of leakage. And so what we try to do in Rosie's and any solidarity economy and community wealth building economy is to limit that leakage, right? That's the whole game. So the money comes in, it pays local workers, of course, but these workers are owners, right? And so the profits are returned to the member owners, as well as the consumer owners and the ecosystem stewards, returned to the owners who are community-based. Our only leakage is NCG, which, as you see, is a part owner in this, right? and they live outside the community. They operate and headquartered outside our community, but it's a cooperative of cooperatives, and Rosie's will be a cooperative of that cooperative. And so when that cooperative makes money, it will return a share of that to Rosie's, right? So it's the best kind of outside partner you can possibly have. Okay, so Rosie's shared ownership. You've got workers at 30%, consumers at 30%, and ecosystem stewards at 40%, with Gatebridge being a 30% owner and NC National Co-op Grocers, NCG, being a 10% owner. So that's the ownership structure, and it creates, in the things that we will incubate, it will create one enterprise that is, we are convinced, has potential to scale, right? Other locations. So this is one store with many different locations. And in our business model right now, 5 different locations for this one enterprise. But hopefully, that'll grow and grow. And being one store with multiple locations, we are thereby able to create economies of scale, lowering our cost of acquisition of goods, COGS, as we say. It's also going to be able to increase our EBITDA and our net income so that we will more quickly be able to have more money to distribute as patronage dividends to the owners, right? So this is an alternative funding model that we have in place here. We get tax-deductible donations coming into a fund that has been set up by a reputable community foundation, Greater Washington Community Foundation. And so, they will oversee all of this. Everything will be transparent. And so consequently, we hope that with potential donors, this gives them greater comfort with regard to the money and how it's being used. By agreement, the money is distributed in this way. 40% of the money will come into Gatebridge for programming and administration, which helps us to run programming in Rosie's Co-op grocery store, right? On community wealth building, solidarity economics, on health equity, nutrition and health, the various programs that we are designing to operate within the space, right? And then, of course, NCG is providing ongoing retail and co-op support, with regard to making sure that pricing is right, making sure that the sales and promotions are right, making sure that the store is running efficiently, right? And to troubleshoot and to crisis manage should any problems arise, right? To have that in our back pocket, we thought to be imperative to making this successful. And on the other side, you've got 60% coming into Gatebridge as a revolving fund. And that basically is to cover our CapEx and OpEx, our patient capital that's getting out the door to stand up the Rosie's grocery stores. Like this first store, CapEx and OpEx is running us, startup CapEx and OpEx is running us around $7 million, right? And that $7 million over a 20, 30-year period, whatever it takes, gets recouped back into our revolving fund when the store and the enterprise is doing well, right? So it's extraordinarily patient capital, not to jeopardize the well-being of the store, but when the store starts to do well, we want to recoup. The idea is that, man, fundraising from foundations is a pain in the neck and some other parts of the anatomy that I won't share. It's terrible, right? It's just terrible. And I want to be able to get to a point of sustainability, sooner than later, so that we can reduce our reliance on philanthropic capital, right? That's the whole idea, to reduce our reliance on Right now, we're 100% reliant on philanthropic capital because we don't want to get traditional debt, that comes out of your EBITDA and slows down your ability to get monies back to workers and to owners. We don't want to do that. We don't want to take out, traditional equity that is going to require, 8 to 12% and sometimes even higher returns, which would jeopardize our ability to do what we want to do. So I need the first tranche of money to be all philanthropic capital. And that's the way that we've designed this to do. And it looks like we'll be successful. Yeah. All right. So you get that. Okay, Rosie, how much more time do I have?
About 20 minutes.
Okay, all right, thank you. So we want to do this differently with regard to the way that we engage workers. We want workers to feel that this is a place where they are, recognized and that they are valued, right? And they are an integral part of what we do moving forward. And of course, they will have representation on the board and will be directors on the board of directors, but I mean in the everyday operation of the place. We want that to come through in no uncertain terms. So we are able to pay competitive wages with benefits to all of our workers, right, from the get-go, and to craft through our workforce development program, a dignifying engagement with workers where they can see themselves growing in ways that will increase their mobility should they ever leave Rosie's, right? You're going to know how to read a business plan, how to read a budget, how to create a budget. You're going to know with regard to the operation of this business, where the key spots are with regard to assessing the health of the business. All of this is going to be part and parcel of the way in which we do business and our relationship with workers. We will eventually get to, and our pro forma right now has us getting to, pretty quickly, profit sharing. Out of EBITDA, we will distribute profit sharing performance bonuses, right? And so that's going to happen beginning year 3, right? Year 3. And the patronage dividends, we break even in year 6. And for these kinds of businesses, these kind of enterprises, right, the standard time to kind of break even is in the 7 to 10 year range, right? Because they're difficult businesses, but we're able to we're going to break even before that period of time in the 6th year, and we'll be distributing patronage dividends, shortly thereafter. But even before then, workers will be rewarded with bonuses in addition to pay that increases every year. So our entry-level workers benefit from ongoing professional development. As I said, department managers are hired from entry-level workers as new stores open. Store managers hired from department managers as new stores open. So you see, we want to hire and promote from within. So our training program for the managerial position for the first store, which is targeted to open Q3 of 2027, we are bringing 2 potential store managers into that training program, which they're paid well across that period of time. They do residency work, on-the-job training in NCG sister stores in Silver Spring, in Greenbelt. They do some work at Georgetown. They do some work in the community, over this 9-month period, right? And so when we bring 2 of them in, hopefully both of them stick. But if they don't stick, we still will hopefully, have one that makes it through. But if both stick, they'll both work in the first store. And when the second store opens, one of them will peel off to be the store manager of the second store, right? And then as we open more stores, we will have had time to cultivate and grow workers from within. So I want to be able to tell stories of, entry-level clerks coming to work for Rosie's, who work their way up to department manager, who work their way up to store manager, and once we have to have the infrastructure beyond the store for other things in order to scale, can work their way into that infrastructure as well, right? This is a story we want to be able to tell and to be proud of with regard to what we do at Rosie's. And as you guys know, I probably would guess that many people in this room are fans and supporters and advocates of, a workforce or workplace democracy. Worker ownership builds financial wealth. At Rosie's, the workers, not external shareholders, as I said, own a significant part of their workplace. And just look at these statistics, right? 53% longer job tenure, right? This is a stable way of engaging in economic development. 33% increase in wages, in businesses that have worker ownership. 92% increase in household wealth. If 30%, and this is a number that really gets me, if 30% of U.S. businesses were worker-owned, the median wealth of black households would increase from $24,000 to $106,000, right? So remember all that work, that talk that we've been giving about the racial wealth gap, huh? If we had an economy that was much more centered around worker ownership, we could take light year leaps, with regard to closing those gaps, huh? So that's why this has to be bigger than Creed opening or Rosie's or any particular initiative or place-based economic development that we do. It has to get into policy. It has to get into broader general education like Next Systems is doing, so as to give people this good news that there is an alternative to the way we do it. And guess what? You are treated better, paid better, and have a better quality of life if we do it this way, right? So from the Urban Institute, for more people to have the ability to improve their health and wellness, they need good jobs, stable housing, and safe communities. Equally important is an empowering environment that provides community members opportunities to develop and exercise leadership skills, right? Community-owned enterprises can help them do this. The model can put power in the hands of people most affected by structural inequity. Work that will ultimately improve health equity as well, right? This is a holistic approach in many ways, right, to dealing with the multifaceted problems that, that communities that are underserved, under-resourced, divested have to deal with, right? So our proposed first location is, at a Benning Road. I don't know if this, resonates with anybody here, but it's in Ward 7, okay? It's going to be a 10,000 square foot store itself. Gatebridge will have an additional 2,500 square feet for this community programming space, right, to be a kind of disruptive force within the community where there is space where people can resist and build, think creatively and imaginatively about, what their community needs, tying it to all the logics of a solidarity, community wealth building economy, right, and doing it in a way, therefore, that has spillover effect to other organizations and institutions within the community and outside the community, right? Okay. So Rosie's is a community-owned asset. The grocery store is 10,000 square feet, as I said, itself. That's 6,500 of sales floor, 3,500 back of store. A product mix in this community of 70% conventional, 30% natural and organic that we will grow at the pace of our customer preferences, right? My diet now is about 80% natural and organic, and my wallet knows it, right? So, it's expensive, huh? And so in certain communities, you don't want to come in top heavy preaching, don't you want to live a better life? Why are you eating this GMO chemical laced junk? You can't do that, you wouldn't do that even if you could get away with it. And so, but you have classes and you have, cohorts within the store and word gets around, people get around. And sometimes, oftentimes, there is, discretion. Look, am I willing to pay $10 more on my grocery bill to have a healthier life, right? Maybe I can take that $10 from somewhere else. But those are decisions you can't reach for people. Those are decisions people have to reach for themselves, right? So locally sourced products is another thing that we are very big on. We're starting out at 20%, but our business plan calls for us in 2030 to have a more integrated supply chain with regard to local farmers. And so I see that growing substantially, okay? And of course, procurement contracts with our social public-private partners. On the community wealth building side, at 2,500 square foot space, that's where the community wealth building incubator will reside. We hope to have community health workers, right, who are engaging people around the social determinants of health and trying to, better the quality of life in the communities where we serve, and we're budgeted for that. Additional funding for community partners. I'd like to, in that additional 10,000 square feet that you saw, be wonderful if we could raise enough money to secure that additional. No, it would be, it would be an additional 7,500 square feet, an additional 7,500 square feet to bring in a partner like UPO that does workforce development, and they have a culinary kitchen and stuff like that, and they're looking to do a commercial kitchen. If we had a commercial kitchen set up in the space adjacent to Rosie's, the agreement between Rosie's and the UPO would be, okay, well look, buy our food at a discount, wholesale, we'll give you a wholesale discount, and you can use that food for your commercial kitchen. Rosie's will have some margins on that food sold to UPO, and therefore it will increase our revenues and at the same time provide them foods that they need for their operation. So I'm constantly looking for synergistic opportunities, right, for partners to join in and around the spaces that we create through Rosie's that can provide the circularity of economics that I'm talking about here, right? Okay, so just to recap on Rosie's, we think, first of all, it is a multifaceted project that sits at the intersection of race, class, health equity. We're going to reduce food insecurity and improve health outcomes, from Jumpstart, right? Because every area that we move into, these stores will be Lila's, the areas that don't have access to fresh food, and we will give them access to fresh food, and that in and of itself we think is a qualified good. Given the social determinants of health and health equity programming that we will bring into the space, we are going to be evaluating our impact there. Are we able to get people's health in a better place than it was before we came? And we think that we can do that, and hopefully we will. We will create 20 to 50 plus upwardly mobile jobs, as I described, at competitive wages with benefits and eventually profit sharing, right? The store starts out with 21 workers. As you migrate that from a first year revenue of, we've got it pegged at about $5.5 million, $5,500,000. We're going to migrate that from that level to a $10 million store. And as we do, we'll need more workers. So we'll start out with 20. We'll end up, when we hit our mark of 10 million, yes, thank you. When we hit our mark of $10 million of annual revenue, then we'll need about 50 workers, right? 50 workers times 5 stores in our business plan is 250 workers once they've reached the $10 million mark. And we hope, of course, to go beyond even the 5 stores, right? Promote worker and community wealth building through local ownership and control, as I've said. So a lot of times, look, 1 in 3 people or 4 people belong to some kind of cooperative in America, right? You would never know it, right? And the point, they don't know it either. It's like we're the best kept secret in the whole country, right? But people don't really know the benefits of cooperativism. And so, sometimes people have to see it and touch it, feel it, to believe it, and which is why we were really pressed on creating a brick and mortar solution, not an online solution to something, because we think that we will be able to generate greater commitment, understanding, of this sector by having something that when you come to a meeting in Rosie's and you shop, you're seeing the very thing that you're talking about, right? And we think that's going to be great. And finally, this model introduces Gatebridge as an ecosystem steward, which I think is a novel component within this sector. As a steward, we will be able to orchestrate, we believe, a very powerful community wealth building model that hopefully, can be, replicated elsewhere. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Wow, I'm really glad that you were all here to hear that, and I was here to hear that. We've had lots of conversations, but the way in which this project has advanced, even in the last year since I first sat down with you over lunch and we were talking about where I was at, is really impressive. And I hope that, and I'm guessing that everybody else in this room, when they were listening to you, got a sense of the fact that we have a resource for this project that could really help us as we sort of move forward in this region and collaborate and so on. So yeah, no, it's going to be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been suggested to me that we take a very short break, and I just want to let you know what we'll be doing. So when I say short, I mean 5 minutes, just catch your breath, and then after the next session, then we'll actually have time for lunch, and you'll have a longer break. But also, I want to say a little bit about the next session. That is going to be the first time that you're getting up and moving around and talking with each other in kind of a structured way. Right? And so I will make the introduction when we come back, but April Donor from the ABCD Institute and the Golden Institute will be leading us through that session. So part of the reason why I just said a little bit about it right now was just to let you know that you can come back within 5 minutes and know that you won't be sitting in a seat and you'll be moving around and so on. So Anthony will be here this afternoon, right? So we'll have more, make connections, learn more about Gatebridge, learn more about Rosie's, learn more about Creed, and there'll be lots of opportunities for people to exchange and so on. So thank you. 5 minutes meeting.